Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to this presentation. I only regret that I cannot be with you in Tallinn, which I consider the most beautiful of all Europeans' capital. But, well, indeed, that would be difficult due to various obligations. I was asked to talk to you about future of local public services. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, I think it should work now. Well, because I have a limited time for the presentation, I will try to be very brief and to concentrate on main bullet points, sometimes not going into explanation of individual, to more detailed explanation of individual issues. But if there is, if it's necessary, we can go back to some details in the discussion. Well, to talk about future of local public services, let's start with a very brief reminder of the past. If we go into deeply into history, before the Second World War, local governments were responsible for a very narrow set of functions, mostly technical infrastructure functions, which might be called metabolic functions, such as water provision, sewage systems, public transport, waste management. The scope of services to be delivered by city governments in Europe has been extended significantly under the Second World War. In Western Europe, it was in parallel with the development of local welfare state, and local governments played important role in the welfare state, especially in delivery of more and more social services. In Eastern Europe, we had a different process, but with some similarities. So we had, of course, not a decentralized system. We had a central planning and strict vertical subordination of local authorities to central authorities. But also in that case, local authorities played important role in social services. This model has been questioned at the end of 20th century and beginning of 21st century by the neoliberal wave in economics. And on this wave, the concept of new public management was developed, which I will talk a bit more about in next minutes. Well, and as we look at contemporary trends, it's difficult to find a single dominant model of local public service delivery. Many assumptions of new public management have been questioned. The idea of privatization and marketization on which new public management was based has been questioned. We have cases of opposite trend of remunicipalization, by which I mean municipalization of services which were previously privatized. And as I said, there is no a single dominant model. If we look at how and why new public management was criticized, we may enumerate several directions of this criticism. First, it was based on a change of a paradigm, dominant paradigm in economics from neoliberal to more Keynesian type of economic approach. And one of the line of criticisms was saying that the impact of new public management on practice of local administration operation was overestimated, and in fact that was disappointing. Second, the criticism was that consequences of trying to apply new public management were different from promised. For example, reduction of costs of service delivery was doubtful. There were some negative consequences of management based on performance indicators, especially in social services. The concept of performance indicators was never developed in a satisfactory way. So many institutions were driven by their position in the ranking of performance indicators rather than pro-social activities. The slogan of that city should be managed like a firm was rejected. Well, indicating that the goal of the company, goal of the firm is maximizing a profit, and this logic should not be applied to management of cities. There was also resistance to changes in communal enterprises, communal in-house departments. So this model was questioned. As I said before, there is a lack of clearly dominant model at the moment. Just to give you one illustration, in 2005, I participated in the broad survey of European mayors covering 27 European countries. Unfortunately, Estonia was not covered by that survey. And one of the parts of the survey was focusing on what mayors think about the preferred way various local services can be managed. And this is an example of the variation of answers in case of waste management, but variation was very similar to in some other services. So as you see, the red color represents proportion of mayors who thought that waste management should be mostly managed by public entities, by public enterprises, and the blue color that it should be managed by private enterprises. And as you see, the variation of opinions across Europe has been tremendous. But what is perhaps even more important is that when we asked mayors why you think, some mayors were saying that more outsourcing is necessary, and some of them were saying, no, at the moment we have too much outsourcing, we should reduce outsourcing to private sector. And when we ask them, why do you think so? arguments of proponents and opponents of outsourcing were very similar. They were using the same arguments. So, for example, some thought that more outsourcing would reduce costs for the citizens. Some others were saying less outsourcing would reduce costs for citizens. Some of supporters of outsourcing were saying that it would help to make service management more flexible, but some of opponents of outsourcing were saying the same. And the same with other arguments. So it confirms the observation that there is no clearly dominant way of thinking. There is a lot of variation on how both practitioners but also academics see the preferred model of local service delivery. When I look at the critics of new public management from the Polish perspective, which I guess might be somehow similar to other, which I'm sure is somehow similar to other countries in eastern part of continent, so I guess it might be also to some extent similar to Estonian perspective. First of all, I can see the time gap, the delay. I mean, the ideas of new public management came to Poland a bit later than to Western Europe, but also the critics, the questioning new public management started a few years later. So there was a period when new public management was widely questioned in many of West European countries, but in Poland it was still seen as a gospel, almost as a dominant trend, and was presented officially even in government strategic documents. But in recent years, also in Poland, we could see a single, not numerous, but single cases of remunicipalization. Perhaps the most significant of them is a case of Gdańsk, the sixth largest Polish city on the seaside, almost 500,000 population, which in early 90s, so over 30 years ago, decided to large extent to privatize water and sewage system, outsourcing the management of water and sewage system in Gdańsk to a French company specializing in that sector. And that has been done quite successfully, and the French company was running the service for several years. But a few years ago, when the duration of a concession was about to expire, Gdańsk government decided not to extend this concession and take over the service by specially prepared new municipal company instead. So that was an example of, probably the most pronounced example of remunicipalization in Poland. If we look at effects of privatization of local public services, different academic research bring different conclusions. What were the effects, for example, on cost saving? What were the economic effects of privatization? Here I rely on a systematic review of several different research which has been done in that area by one of and published in an article in one of the journals, which summarizes the results of academic studies in the following items. First, that usually you can see positive effects, but more in technical infrastructure services, but very rarely in social policies. Second, those cost savings are very frequent in the initial period, but decrease in following years when the private firm builds its monopolist position. And third, it seems that those positive effects, cost saving, were more visible for some reason in studies concerning US and United Kingdom, much more than in continental Europe. When we talk about current trends and possible paths of further development in local public services, there has been definitely a stress on intermunicipal cooperation in recent decades. So this growing trend to rely on intermunicipal cooperation in some countries, for many years in France, more recently also in Italy, but also in Finland, for example, the trend towards intermunicipal cooperation has developed over the last decades. But some countries, so France or Italy, are examples of countries with very territorially fragmented systems, with very small local governments, which may explain why intermunicipal cooperation is necessary. But it is also very important in some countries which have larger local government, more consolidated territorial systems like Finland or Netherlands. Well, there are well-known arguments why intermunicipal cooperation may help: economies of scale, so cost reduction, better coordination of functionally integrated areas, or better visibility in promotion or tourist promotion activities, for example. And there is, of course, a variety of different institutional forms, starting from contracts where one local government buys service from another one, or creation of either private law or public law institutions, new institutions which would jointly deliver services on behalf of a group of municipalities. In practice, if we look in Europe, the role of intermunicipal cooperation is highly diversified across countries, as you see on those examples on the slide. In France, Finland, or Netherlands, a significant proportion of municipal money is spent through various forms of intermunicipal cooperation, but in Poland or Czech Republic, it's rather only a tiny proportion. And again, you may ask a question: what academic studies say? Does intermunicipal cooperation really provide cost savings? And again, we have mixed results of various empirical studies. But systematic review or meta-analysis of various academic studies suggests that there are some conditions which increase likelihood of saving. First, if there are very small local governments which cooperate, and that might be explained by economy of scale phenomenon. Second, if cooperation is voluntary, rather than obligatory. In some of European countries, there are examples of mandatory, compulsory cooperation, and academic research suggests they bring less benefits. And third, if cooperation is clearly focused on a single service, rather than diluted among more multiple goals. So therefore, suggestion is that if we want to promote intermunicipal cooperation, it's wiser to apply even strong incentives, but not compulsory mechanism, not obligation to cooperate. I mentioned a couple of times the phenomenon of remunicipalization. So one may ask whether that's a future of local public services. In European literature, one of the first study on remunicipalization was by Helmut Wollmann and Gérard Marcoux in 2010, and they started with observation that an engine of remunicipalization was a critics of the logic of privatization, and they provided some examples of the return of public sector in 21st century. In Germany, they quote examples of buying shares in earlier privatized energy companies or waste management companies. In France, they concentrate on the water sector and indicate several cities which decided not to extend concessions for private providers. Paris in 2009 was one of the first cases. In Italy, they discuss the referendum on privatization of private sector, which was rejected. I mean, this referendum rejected this idea, which put Italy in the same stream. And some quantitative studies show that there were several hundred numbers of remunicipalization cases in Europe. The most frequent, they were in Germany, mainly related to energy sector, and in France, mainly related to water sector, but also in some other European countries. And here you have this number of remunicipalization cases broken by sectors. So you may see that water and energy were the most often, but they also happened in waste management or in social care. But what is interesting and what is important to notice is that there was a clear increase of frequency of remunicipalization during and after the 2008-2009 banking and economic crisis and recession. And there was a clear increase of a trend until around 2016. And then the number of remunicipalization cases began to drop. And after 2020, we see only rare cases. So again, we may rather think about variation of models, not a dominant model of remunicipalization for everyone. And to think about challenges for the future of local public services, let me make a very short deviation from the main topic, because I think the main one of the main challenges is related to style of leadership of local mayors, of local political leaders. And to make this comment, let me introduce briefly a typology of leadership styles presented by Peter John and Andrew Cole 25 years ago. And they distinguish between 4 styles of leadership using 2 dimensions. One dimension on horizontal axis is between more authoritarian and more responsive leader. The more authoritarian is a leader who has its own vision and is trying to implement its own vision. The responsive mayor is more open to discuss and to develop a vision in a broad discussion, broad consultations with different stakeholders, with a general public. On the vertical axis, we have a difference between what is sometimes called in academic literature power over and power to. Power over is relying on hierarchical power, and it's relying on own resources which I, as a leader, possess. Power two is based on horizontal coordination and cooperation and trying to mobilize resources of other actors, of societal organizations, of local businesses, or many other actors to implement the development strategy together. And when we cross these 2 dimensions, we have 4 types of leadership. We have city boss who says, I have my own vision and I will implement it, to be very simplistic. Visionary, who is the leader who says, I have my vision, I know what I want, and go with me, let's cooperate to implement that vision. Caretaker is someone who says, let's talk about the vision, about goals, about a strategy, and I will implement once we agreed. And consensus facilitator is someone who says, let's discuss what should be the vision and let's try to implement it together, to present this typology in a very simplistic way. And when I was doing 3 times research in Poland, checking what are preferred styles of local political leadership by general public. And if you look at this picture carefully, you may see the changes. At the beginning of 21st century, and even more in the last decade of 20th century, it was relatively widely accepted that leader should be a visionary with own style and with own strategy, own vision, and implementing it. Gradually, and nowadays, there is a more and more dominant expectation of consensus facilitator. So someone who is able to talk and discuss the vision with other stakeholders, not imposing his or her own vision only. And I think that this is, at least in Poland, but I guess it's a wider phenomenon. It's a very important change. People in the 20th century, beginning or 2 decades ago, technocratic style of management was more accepted or even expected. Technocratic managers. Nowadays, people want to have leaders who are able to talk to them, who listen to them. So the style of leadership is extremely important for the successful management of services. Another challenge for the future of local public services is depopulation. And on a case of few countries, I show here that depopulation is first of all the problem of rural areas. Of course, we have also phenomenon of shrinking cities, but first of all, we have rural areas which suffer of depopulation. So one of answers for depopulation is territorial amalgamation. Of Estonian municipalities before and after amalgamation.
Recording in progress.
Estonian municipality before the reform was just below 2,000, and nowadays is almost 10,000, which is of course 5 times bigger. But when we look at results of territorial amalgamation reforms, in terms of cost saving, effects are rather disappointing. Except of saving on administrative services, saving on other services are doubtful. Even more disappointing are the results of territorial amalgamation as regards the impact on local democracy. But at the same time, they allow a specialization of local staff, and they increase capacity to provide services. With depopulation, some form of territorial reorganization may be unavoidable to adapt modes of service delivery to the population. For example, in Poland, there are discussions about possibility of sharing or delegating some of municipal tasks to upper tier of government when municipal government becomes too small and not able to deliver the service efficiently. I will come back to that moment, to that issue at the moment. Some people think that centralization of service delivery might be a response to depopulation as well. I mean, by re-centralization, I mean taking over those services by central government administration. So let's, first of all, let's ask, has it ever happened in Europe? I was involved in a study of local autonomy index, measuring changes of local autonomy in all European countries. And in this study, we could find that there were several cases of very modest decentralization after the 2008 crisis. But they were focused mostly not on delivery of services, but on control of borrowing and on financial items, not on service delivery. The only case I know of a radical decentralization is Hungary. But it was motivated more by ideology and by extreme territorial fragmentation in Hungary, with over 3,000 municipalities in that not very large country. Also in Poland, we could see not that radical as in Hungary, decentralization after 2015, but again, it was ideology motivated rather than service delivery motivated. I can advertise here a book which is open access book, Dynamics and Issues of Local Autonomy, published a few months ago, in which those phenomena are described much more in details. So here you have how index of local autonomy was changing in Hungary, the red line, and in Poland on a blue line. So as you see, the decentralization or the drop of autonomy index in Hungary was deeper than in Poland, was also a bit earlier, but the population was not really something beyond those changes. As I mentioned before, the population in Poland caused some discussions about allowing delegation of functions to upper tier in the future, like school management, for example. Single municipality may become too small to have a good school for the children living in that municipality. So that would mean asymmetric decentralization solution, in which different municipalities are responsible for a different set of functions. It's more difficult to think about this solution in a single tier system, as I understand it's a case of Estonia. I am aware that I should finish very soon, and I am very close to the end of my presentation. Next challenge, which I think we face in provision of public services in eastern part of continent, is a changing role of EU structural funds. Because of development success, because the difference in a level of affluence between countries of Eastern Europe and Western Europe is shrinking, we are going to be victims of that success, and we will face shrinkage of EU structural funds, which are important for many local investments, especially implemented by local governments. Also, due to change of priorities in EU budget, we may expect more money would go to defense, to security, less to structural funds. Also, in some countries, there is a tendency to centralize management of structural funds, which would be at cost of access to those funds by local governments. Anyway, local governments have to reinvent themselves also in terms of ways of financing development of infrastructure necessary for local public services. So, conclusions. I think that for the future of local public services, what is important, it's not only a technocratic managerial issues, but also styles of leadership, as I mentioned. Also ability to talk to local community, and of course also recognition of diversified local economic and social conditions. So there is no one way which would fit all local conditions or even all countries in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention. I am sorry that I talked perhaps few minutes too long, but just few minutes. And well, of course, if there are some immediate questions, I am open, or we can be in touch in the future if you wish so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No worries. Yeah, the applause is, of course, welcome. Yeah, no worries. It was absolutely relevant for Estonia. You touched upon so many issues that are considered and that are, well, done in one way and then vice versa, and tried different concepts in Estonia as well. So it was really refreshing and comforting to hear that all these downturns have happened in all the other countries as well. So thank you for this. And indeed, we've got some questions. First, I have a look around the audience. Perhaps, yeah, here are, perhaps, okay. And then you in the first row, okay.
Thank you for interesting, extensive presentation. We have followed very carefully presidential elections in Poland, and just reflecting this, should there be or can there be different municipality level policy choices in big cities versus in rural areas, if you take the case of your country?
Mm-hmm. Should I respond immediately, or rather collect few questions and answer then? What would be the...
That's a good recommendation. So here was another question. Let's take these two and then group them.
Thank you. My question is quite apocalyptic. Estonia is neighbor of Russia, and the lowest developing countries, parts of the country, are next to Russia. So I can't see really that the central government is doing something that would boost the life and livelihood next to Russia. I'm from this area. What is your opinion? What would happen to that empty ground next to border of an enemy?
Yeah, perhaps let's take these two, and here are a few more. And but Prof Swianiewicz, yeah, the floor is yours.
Well, so thanks for those questions. Some of them quite difficult for me, but let me start with the last one. Well, first of all, you are not the only one who has a border with Russia. We, Poland, have a border with Russia, or with Königsberg region, oblast directly, but we have also bordered with Belarus, which is almost the same as with Russia. But indeed, you touched an important issue. Also in Poland, an eastern part of a country close to border with Belarus is a part which depopulates the fastest. And well, there was a period when there was a belief that it's enough to concentrate on development of main agglomerations, and that this development would be beneficiary for the whole country, and that this development gradually would extend to more peripheral, to more a province, a countryside. And people in those countryside areas felt to some extent abandoned, and that policy might accelerate the depopulation of that areas. And nowadays we all agree that it was a mistake. It is important, well, sort of equalization policy, equalization in terms of access to services is extremely important. Well, I mean, I do not mean, because that would be totally unrealistic, that every region of a country is on an equal level of economic development. But some effort to reduce the inequalities is very important. And interestingly, well, it is the policy of European Union to reduce inequalities between member states and between big regions in member states, but the same is necessary on a more local level if we want to have policy which is accepted and which is successful. I am aware that my answer is on a quite general level, but well, that's the nature of our meeting, that we do not have time to go very much in the details. And as regards the first question, first you mentioned presidential election. At least for a moment, results of presidential election would not have direct impact on central local relations or on a position of municipal governments in Poland. President, well, in a Polish political system, it's mostly government who forms the policies, but the president has a veto power which may block several government initiatives. So yes, in a longer term, I might be afraid of that impact, especially having in mind that the attitude of the previous government and new president, newly elected president, originates from the same party as the previous central government in Poland. Attitude of the previous government towards local governments and towards local autonomy was not very positive. I mean, understanding of values of decentralization was not high on a list of priorities. And you asked about variation between big municipalities and very small municipalities. Well, in Poland, we do not have really extremely small municipalities like in Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, France, or like you had before your amalgamation reforms. None of municipalities in Poland has less than 1,000 population, and only very few have less than 2,000 population. But indeed, due to depopulation, this issue of small local governments sort of becomes more and more difficult, more and more severe. And in the longer term, I really expect that it's inevitable to have what I called in my presentation asymmetric decentralization. So larger local governments would be responsible for a wider set of services, while those smaller and depopulating municipalities may be unable to deliver some of the services, especially some of the social services, and they would need to be taken either through by some intermunicipal organizations or by upper tiers of a government. So yes, I consider that in a longer term, variation of functions or differences of functions between large and small municipalities, this change is inevitable.
Thank you so much. Reluctantly, I have to wrap up because our time is up, but I'm really glad that you came to this clear indication to the future local governance, which is, as you call it, the asymmetric centralization. This is right now suggested for Estonia too in a major study that was just recently finalized. And yeah, this is something to be debated pretty soon in Estonia, I hope at least. Thank you so much for this very enlightening presentation.
Thank you.
Comforting as well, as I said, to have all this comparison from Poland and other countries. And wish you good luck with your further research and your work in many advisory roles. Thanks. Thank you that could join us today, and wish you all the best.
And I hope to see you again in the future, maybe face to face, not just online. Thank you very much. Bye.
I hope so too. Thank you.